Men nu ska vi faktiskt lämna över ordet och lämna Sverige till och med en liten stund. Vi ska över till Strasbourg där vi ska få höra en kort föreläsning om hur du kan engagera dig på ett hållbart sätt så att du orkar.
Och hon heter Kirsty Henderson. Hon är en av grundarna till kampanjen, ska jag se om min franska är bra här, Assiettes Végétales. Som hon har tidigare varit kommunikationschef på Anima International. Och där är hon verksamhetschef idag. Och kom ihåg nu att det går jättebra att ställa dina frågor till Kirsty under föreläsningens gång. Och sen så kommer vi ta upp dem i slutet i mån av tid.
Yeah, so we are gonna switch the language and say hello and welcome to Kirsty Henderson.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Kirsty.
You can hear me. That's a good start.
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
Thank
to
you.
Digital Summit.
Your French pronunciation was very good, by
Oh
the way.
God, yeah. Thank you so much. I feel very relieved. But Kirsty, just take it away.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk to you all about what I'm calling today sustainable activism and how to be resilient for our activism for the animals. And this story begins last year. In August, actually, when I gave a speech at another animal protection conference that was actually in Poland. And this speech was about something called grit. I did the same speech 2 months later in Norway. And actually, the organizers of this conference here asked me to talk about something similar. At the time, my aim was to try and empower people, other activists, and give them some practical information about how they could become grittier. And this term, it was coined actually by a scientist who, she's called Angela Duckworth, and her work intended to show that a combination of passion and persistence was the key to being successful. Now, first of all, I'm going to figure out how to share my screen with you guys. Let's go. Okay. Bear with me a second and we'll get this up and running. Okay, so this was a conference last year at which I gave the talk about grit, as you can see. And yet, when Djurren asked me to do this speech, I was quite hesitant, even though I'd given something like this speech before. And the reason why is because in January this year, actually the first message I received, I thought it was going to be wishing me Happy New Year and so on. Actually, one of my colleagues sent me this message. And my first reaction was to feel slightly irritated. I was expecting, as I mentioned, best wishes or Happy New Year. Instead, I got one of my colleagues who was telling me that in their opinion, I had been giving speeches around Europe about a concept that didn't exist. And also when someone uses an upside down smiley, they're trying to troll you a bit. But sure enough, after looking into it a bit more, it does seem that this grit doesn't seem to be super supported in science. And rather, it seems that things like self-confidence and conscientiousness are better predictors of success. Now, personally, to that list, I would add the ability to take care of yourself as being a factor that allows us to continue this fight for animals. Now, me personally, I've been involved in the fight for animal rights for about 9 years professionally. I've worked for several different organizations. I founded one of my own, and I'm currently working with Anima International. And Anima International is a coalition of organizations across 9 countries. We have about 90 employees. And I've learned a lot during this time. That's why I'm saying this. And I'm still learning about how to be the best animal advocate I can be. And as you can see from the story I just told, I also do make mistakes. Now, today I hope to share with you some basic advice about what I've learned along the way to try and help you ensure that your activism is both sustainable and effective. We're going to talk about these three different things. The first is self-confidence, second, conscientiousness, and third, self-care. And I believe there will also be some time at the end for questions. So the first one is to move to self-confidence. Now, strangely, some of my friends tell me that I seem to be confident. And each time they say something like this, I want to look behind me and find actually who is this person they're talking to, because it can't be me. And in general, I would say that for me, confidence has been a real issue and probably will continue to be. But because of that, I've seen firsthand how it can affect our ability to get more active for animals. Do I really have the skills to do that? Won't it be scary? Will people disagree with me? Maybe I'll do something wrong, or maybe I will fail. These are questions that I ask myself all the time, and I know from my colleagues, many of them do the same. I remember a day actually back in 2015 when the UK government had attempted to legalise fox hunting, or they were going to attempt this. And there was due to be a vote in the House of Commons. I was working for a UK-based animal protection charity at the time, and I saw that no one else was organising a protest to do more about this subject. There were many other groups working on the issue, but not a protest was planned. And I thought it would be a good idea, a good media opportunity to try and put pressure on the members of Parliament to vote against this new bill. I also already had lots of experience organising protests, so I decided to plan one myself the day before the vote. Now, I thought maybe 40 people would show up. Instead, while I was walking to the protest location in central London, I got a call from Westminster Police, and the policeman said to me, "Hi, Kirsty. Are you planning to burn down Parliament today?" Of course, I answered, well, no, not today. And apparently this 40 people that I had imagined in my mind was actually hundreds of people who had come from across the country to support the rights of foxes. My self-confidence here was certainly tested. Did I have the skills and knowledge to be able to make this work? Would I ensure that everyone was safe during this protest? Would it work? Now, I had arranged with some colleagues for Brian May, yes, the guitarist from Queen, to come and speak at the demonstration, as, of course, getting a celebrity involved would mean even more attention for the subject. And getting more attention certainly worked. Here's another photograph from the same moment, but from the other side. And you can see how many, just a selection of the press that were here to see Brian May speak at this protest. Now, what you don't see in this photo was my complete failure of self-confidence that had happened just moments before. Because while waiting for Brian May to arrive, I was supposed to give a short speech using a microphone and a speaker to introduce the protest, to get people excited and to let them know that Brian would soon be there. But all I could think about was, how am I on the same stage as the guitarist from Queen? This is not right at all. I had the microphone in my hand, and honestly, for about 5 minutes, I just stood there and tried to make a sound, and nothing came out of my mouth. In the end, I just gave up, and Brian May was the only person who spoke on that day. That's me, looking rather worried. But why am I telling you this story? For several reasons. Because there will be times in your activism for animals where you have to do something you don't want to do, something that is hard or something that makes you feel uncomfortable. You may, like I did, fail when attempting something, and that's okay. You will also find that with practice, your self-confidence improves because, I wasn't able to give the speech on this day, but I had organised and managed to organise this huge, important protest, which I should have been proud about. And you will also see that as long as you don't let self-confidence and worries completely paralyse you, you can and you will succeed. And this headline is to show you that actually Brian May was able to announce at that time that the vote had been cancelled. So we had won at this point. And that was self-confidence. That's one of my ingredients for sustainable activism. The second one is conscientiousness. Now, this is kind of what I wanted to talk about in my original speech about grit, because conscientiousness is the tendency to be responsible, to be organised, and to be hardworking. It's also associated with adhering to norms and to rules. But as we're all animal activists here, I think we can maybe leave that section out. In short, though, someone who is conscientious, they're more likely to exercise self-control, to exercise responsibility and reliability. And there is definitely a correlation between these traits and success. So people at the higher spectrum of conscientiousness may be potentially at risk of perfectionism and being workaholics, for example. And sometimes they can fare poorly under stress, under high stress. And the opposite is true as well, that those with low conscientiousness may have, tendency to be flexible or spontaneous. But the interesting thing is it's not really known if we can actually improve our conscientiousness in itself. It may be simply that it's a personality trait and that's somewhat inflexible. There seems to also be some evidence that it is inherited through our genes, and MRI scans have also identified that there is a link between brain structure and conscientiousness. But even if we can't actually change our personalities here, what we can certainly do is engage in more conscientious behaviour. And if we want to be successful in our activism, that is something that could help us do that. So these are some conscientious behaviours that you can try and implement in everyday lives. The first is mental contrasting, and that is one technique by which individuals imagine a goal, the path to that goal, and the obstacles that are likely to be encountered along the way. And that's been shown to help people set feasible goals and boost their commitment to achieving them. So, for example, you may want to campaign for, a complete ban on fur farming in Sweden, in which case it would be good practice to see this goal and then imagine the path and the goal and what you would actually need to do step by step to get there. It sounds quite simple, but it can actually help us do these more conscientious behaviours. The second one is contingency management, and that means reinforcing and rewarding positive changes in behaviour. So for example, being on time for a meeting or meeting a deadline, it can improve conscientiousness, and studies have shown, interesting, that it can actually help promote positive behaviour in people, even with alcohol or substance abuse problems. So putting this in context of animal activism, one of my tasks at Anima International has been working to get global cage-free commitments from huge corporations. Now, the thing I hate about these high-pressure meetings is where you're trying to convince someone who has a lot of power to do something. So what I did was I set myself goals. Maybe I can have 5 of these uncomfortable conversations per month, and I will reward myself after each one of these calls. Now, the third one is called implementation intentions. And this is another technique which involves the creation of like concrete contingency plans. And they're things like, I intend to do X if Y occurs. So, for example, I will do my breathing exercises for 5 minutes if I feel too anxious before the meeting. Now, this is something that I used to do all the time when I first started as an animal activist. I thought I was just being a pessimist, but turns out I was actually doing something that can be helpful to our behaviors. And so, for example, I would say to myself, okay, if it rains during this protest, I will do this. If the police try to stop us from protesting, I will do this. And if no journalists show up, then I will do this. And it helped me to think about the obstacles and what exactly I would do if they arrived. And finally, the fourth conscientious behavior that you can try and adopt more of is called episodic future thinking. And this encourages people to try and pre-experience their future. It sounds quite, spiritual, but all it means is just thinking about something and imagining it as if it was actually happening to you in that moment. So, for example, when negotiating with a company, I will sometimes sit at my desk, close my eyes, and imagine how it will actually feel when they say no to what I want. And doing that in advance means I get all the bad feelings out of the way and I can deal with it better when it happens in the moment. Now, they're the things associated with conscientiousness. I'm going to quickly move on to self-care. And this is the third recipe for what I would say is sustainable activism. Because being an activist for animals, let's be honest, it can be hard work. Every day is a constant battle and our adversaries are strong. People might laugh at us even. We frequently have to see distressing and disturbing images of animals being exploited and killed around the world. And if you're anything like me, then maybe you also suffer from this guilt of thinking that you can never do enough, and maybe even a bit of shame for thinking that your work is never good enough. But the thing is, the animal protection movement needs people like you. People who join an online talk on a Saturday morning instead of staying in bed because they actually want to make the world a better place for animals. We're also not going to win this fight overnight. We need people like you for the long term. And that means you also need to take care of yourself, to step back occasionally and to refill your cup. So, having been involved in animal protection for many years now, here are my pieces of advice for you. The first one is to really take care of your body, and that includes making sure you get enough sleep. Because in order to fight for animals, you need to give your body everything it needs to be healthy. That's sleep, good exercise, good diet. And I said this already maybe twice, but please do not neglect sleep. It is so important. Next is to find your people. Now, any kind of campaigning or advocacy will feel a lot harder if you have to do it alone. I suggest instead that you surround yourself with like-minded people who are fighting for the same thing as you. People who experience the same challenges and frustrations and the same joys when you make progress. You may want to become a volunteer with djurensraad, for example. I would also suggest that you limit things that drain your energy. So when you're involved in advocacy or activism, there is an expectation, or certainly that's an expectation I have for myself, to always be working at 100%. Because things are urgent. Animals are dying right now, so you should, right? But the thing is, if you're trying to solve these problems, then you'd also need time to take rest. Energy is not an infinite gift. And activists who work too hard, too fast, will soon burn out unless they take breaks to recharge their batteries. The same goes for asking for help. Life is hard, animal activism can be hard, and we won't know the answers to everything, of course. Sometimes you might get stuck, and you should always know that you can always ask people for help. I'd also recommend learning where to draw the line. That would be different for everyone, but not even the most dedicated, efficient and sustainable activists in the world can't do everything. You can learn where your boundaries are and then learn how to say no to things beyond them that you simply do not have the energy for. Now, this is not me saying that you should never try and push those boundaries, or that you shouldn't go outside of your comfort zone. I think those two things are very, very important. But when you feel like you cannot take on any more tasks or projects, speak up. Otherwise, your work on all of the projects could suffer. And the last piece of advice, which I think is the most important, if you're going to remember one thing from this talk today, I would recommend it be this. And that is to not take things personally. This is something that I try and tell myself many times every day, because I cannot tell you how many bad moods I've had or negative emotions I felt simply because I took someone else's actions personally. But instead, you should remember that how people treat you actually has nothing to do with you. It says a lot more about themselves. So, for example, if someone is upset with you because you didn't say hello to them at the weekend when you walked past them in the street, that says more about their own insecurity than it does about you not seeing them. And once you accept that and internalize it, you won't need to worry about other people anymore. And you can spend your time and your effort thinking about more important things. And so I hope that by sharing these things with you, that these things that I've learned during my time as an animal advocate, that it can help you on your own path and towards your own sustainable and effective activism. I urge you to try and increase your self-confidence, adopt conscientious behaviours, and take care of yourself. If you have any further questions or you just want to reach me, you can contact me here. And I think now we maybe have time for some questions.
Yes, Kirsty, thank you for a very inspiring speech. We do have a little question. It is from the beginning of your speech. It's about if you could explain further what grit means.
Yes. So grit is something that was, it's a title coined by a scientist called Angela Duckworth. She did a lot of research about it, and her research intended to show that two things, passion and perseverance, contribute to, how to put it, bigger success in life. Now, I think there is some truth in that, but after receiving this message from my colleague, I actually looked into it more, and the science on that is limited, which is why actually when you look into it, it's more to do with self-confidence and conscientiousness. So grit is more of a marketing term for how having perseverance and trying things that make you feel uncomfortable can actually make you more likely to succeed. But just remember, conscientiousness and self-confidence, they're two more important things to remember.
Great. And just to wrap it up, the last question would be, what if you could put it in one sentence, what would you send to your viewers to motivate them to engage themselves for animals' cause?
Okay, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is know that you will fail sometimes. That sounds quite pessimistic, but I actually hope it will be the opposite, because I think a lot of us can be paralyzed by this fear of not doing something correctly, and it stops people from doing anything at all. So I would just encourage you to know everyone has this feeling. Get involved and you will be fine, and you will actually make a difference.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kirsty.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsty Henderson from Anima International.